He told everyone he had urgent business in New York, a deal that couldn't wait, a problem that needed his presence. Then 15 minutes later, Dominic Crane pulled his black Mercedes into the narrow alley behind his own mansion, like a stranger sneaking into a house that belonged to him, because something in his gut had been screaming for weeks. And tonight, he was finally going to listen. The goodbye had looked perfect. Victoria had kissed his cheek, her lips soft, her smile softer. "Come back soon, darling," she'd whispered, smoothing his tie like a wife who actually cared. 8-year-old Lucas had wrapped his arms around Dominic's leg. "Do you have to go, Dad?" 6-year-old Mia had tugged at his jacket, eyes wide and wet. "Will you call us?" Dominic had knelt down, pulled both children close, and forced a smile that felt like glass in his mouth. "I'll be back before you even miss me." But he hadn't looked at Victoria when he said it. He'd looked past her at Elena Martinez, standing quietly in the corner of the foyer, the housekeeper, 22 years old, dark hair pulled back, hands folded, eyes that saw everything but said nothing. For just a moment, their gazes met, and Dominic saw something in her expression that he couldn't name. Something that looked like warning, something that looked like fear. Not for herself, for his children. That was when he knew. He wasn't getting on any plane tonight. The basement room was cold. Concrete walls, no windows. A single desk facing 6 monitors that flickered to life the moment Dominic pressed the switch. This was the nerve center of Crane Estate, a surveillance system that most people didn't know existed. 32 cameras. Every room, every hallway, every corner of the mansion, captured in crisp, merciless detail. Dominic had installed it 3 years ago, after Isabella died. Back then, it was about security, protection, making sure his children were safe, in a world that had already taken their mother. He never thought he'd use it to watch the woman sleeping in his bed. The screens glowed in the darkness. Kitchen, living room, staircase, children's bedroom, master suite. Dominic loosened his tie and sat down heavily in the leather chair. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. Victoria Ashford, 32 years old, daughter of one of his most powerful allies. Beautiful, charming, perfect in every way that mattered to the outside world. They'd been engaged for 8 months. She'd moved in 6 months ago, and for the first few weeks, everything had seemed fine. Then the whispers started. Little comments about Elena, small concerns about the children, tiny seeds of doubt planted so carefully that Dominic almost didn't notice them growing. Almost. But Dominic Crane hadn't built an empire by ignoring his instincts. He hadn't survived 36 years in this world by trusting pretty smiles and soft words. He'd learned the hard way that the most dangerous enemies don't kick down your door. They walk in through the front gate, kiss you goodnight, and wait for you to fall asleep. On the center screen, Victoria appeared in the living room. She was pouring herself a glass of wine, her silk robe catching the lamplight. She looked relaxed, content, like a queen who'd just sent the king away. Dominic leaned forward, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. "Show me who you really are," he murmured to the screen. "Show me what you do when you think no one's watching." The monitors hummed softly in the darkness. And Dominic Crane, the man who controlled half of Chicago's underworld, sat alone in his own basement, watching his own house, waiting to see if the woman he'd let into his life was the same woman who smiled at his children. Because the truth wasn't in New York. The truth was happening right above his head. And tonight, he was going to find it. For the first hour, nothing happened. Dominic watched the screens with the patience of a man who had waited years for deals to close, for enemies to slip, for the right moment to strike. He watched Victoria finish her wine and drift upstairs to the master bedroom. He watched the house go dark, room by room, like a body falling asleep. He almost convinced himself that he was wrong, that the whispers in his gut were just paranoia, that Victoria was exactly who she appeared to be. Then morning came, and everything changed. The kitchen camera showed Elena at the stove, her back straight, her movements efficient. She was making pancakes, the kind with chocolate chips that Lucas loved, the kind with strawberries that made Mia smile. The children sat at the marble island, still in their pajamas. Lucas was telling Elena about a dream he'd had. Mia was swinging her legs, waiting for her plate with barely contained excitement. Elena laughed at something, Lucas said. A real laugh, warm and unguarded. And for a moment, watching from the cold basement, Dominic felt something twist in his chest. This was what breakfast was supposed to look like. This was what his children deserved every morning. This was what he'd been too busy to give them. Then Victoria walked in. She was wearing a cream silk robe, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup already flawless at 7 in the morning. She paused in the doorway, watching the scene with eyes that calculated rather than observed. Elena noticed her first. The laughter died on her lips. She turned back to the stove, her shoulders tightening almost imperceptibly. "Good morning, Miss Ashford," Elena said quietly. "Would you like coffee?" Victoria didn't answer. She walked slowly into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the tile like a countdown. She stopped behind Mia's chair, placed one manicured hand on the girl's shoulder, and smiled. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Elena." The name came out like a whip crack. Elena turned, spatula still in hand. "Yes, ma'am?" Victoria's voice dropped, low, cold, sharp as a blade pressed against skin. "Don't you dare smile at these children like you're their mother. You're not their mother. You're not their family. You're the help. Do you understand me? You are nothing but the help." The words hung in the air like poison. Lucas's spoon clattered against his plate. He froze, eyes wide, staring at Victoria with an expression that Dominic recognized instantly. Fear. Not surprise, not confusion. Fear. The kind that comes from repetition. The kind that settles into a child's bones when they've learned that certain sounds mean danger is coming. Mia shrank back in her chair, her small body curling inward like a flower closing against frost. Her hand reached out blindly, searching for something to hold on to. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply set down the spatula, walked around the island, and placed her hand gently on Mia's shoulder. A quiet anchor, a silent promise. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Did I say you could touch her?" "The pancakes are ready," Elena replied, her voice steady as stone. "Should I plate them for the children, ma'am?" For a long moment, Victoria stared at her. The air between them crackled with something unspoken. A battle of wills fought in silence. Then Victoria smiled again. That perfect, practiced smile. "Of course," she said sweetly, turning to leave. "Make sure they eat quickly. I don't want crumbs everywhere." She walked out without looking back. The moment she was gone, Mia's small hand found Elena's and held on tight. In the basement, Dominic sat motionless. His fingers had turned white around the armrests. His jaw ached from clenching. His chest felt like someone had poured concrete into it and left it to harden. He had never seen this. Not once. Not ever. When he was home, Victoria was warmth and laughter and gentle touches. She read bedtime stories. She kissed, scraped knees. She called Lucas my little prince and Mia my angel. But this woman on the screen, this cold, cruel stranger wearing Victoria's face, he didn't recognize her at all. And worse than that, far worse, his children did. They recognized her perfectly. They knew exactly what to do when her voice changed. They knew to freeze, to shrink, to disappear. Which meant this wasn't the first time. This wasn't even close to the first time. Dominic's hand moved slowly to his chest, pressing against the place where his heart was supposed to be. "How long?" he thought, the question burning through him like acid. "How long has this been happening in my own house?" Dominic pressed pause on the screen, but the image kept burning in his mind. Mia's small hand reaching for Elena, Lucas's frozen stare, the practiced terror in their bodies. How had he missed this? He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, and the memories came flooding back. Not the memories he wanted, but the ones he needed to see clearly now. The seeds had been planted weeks ago, and he had let them grow. It started on a quiet evening in early autumn. The children were already asleep. The house was still. Dominic sat by the fireplace in the study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the flames dance. Victoria curled beside him on the leather sofa, her head resting against his shoulder. She smelled like jasmine and expensive promises. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice soft as velvet, "can I tell you something?" He turned his head slightly. "Of course." Victoria hesitated. She bit her lip, a gesture so perfectly timed that he never thought to question it. "I don't want to say this. I really don't, but..." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Elena, the housekeeper, don't you think she's getting a little too close to the children?" Dominic frowned. "What do you mean?" Victoria lifted her head, her eyes full of practiced concern. "They listen to her more than they listen to me. When I ask them to do something, they look at her first, like they're waiting for her permission." She reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I worry, that's all. She's the help, Dominic. She shouldn't have that kind of influence over your children." Dominic had shrugged it off that night. Elena had been with them for 2 years. She was quiet, reliable, good with Lucas and Mia. He saw no reason to doubt her. but the seed was planted. A week later, Dominic couldn't find his Rolex. It was the one Isabella had given him on their 5th anniversary. He never wore it anymore, too many memories, but he kept it in the drawer of his nightstand, a piece of her he couldn't let go. When he mentioned it to Victoria, she tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's strange," she said slowly. "I saw Elena cleaning in your room yesterday. She was near the nightstand for quite a while. She didn't accuse, she didn't suggest. She just let the words hang in the air and walked away." The watch turned up 3 days later, buried under some papers in his office. Victoria smiled when he told her, "Oh, thank goodness. Maybe you just misplaced it, darling." But the doubt remained. Then came the small things. Cash missing from the drawer in the study. Not much, a few $100s here and there. Enough to notice. Not enough to investigate. Victoria never pointed fingers. She just sighed and said, "I'm sure there's an explanation." One afternoon, Lucas mentioned casually at dinner that Elena had given him candy without asking Victoria first. Victoria's face fell. Just for a moment. Just enough for Dominic to see. "I'm not trying to be controlling," she said later that night, her voice trembling slightly. "But she undermines me constantly. The children don't respect me because she teaches them not to." She looked up at him with glistening eyes. "I'm only trying to protect this family, Dominic. I'm only trying to protect you. Protect." That word had lodged itself in his chest like a splinter, and he had believed her. Every sigh, every worried glance, every carefully constructed silence. He had nodded along, patted her hand, promised to keep an eye on things. He had trusted the woman in his bed over the woman who fed his children breakfast. Now, sitting in the cold blue light of the monitors, Dominic saw it all with horrifying clarity. The missing watch, the vanishing cash, the whispered concerns. None of it was real. None of it was Elena. It was Victoria. Every single piece of it. She hadn't accused because she didn't need to. She had learned that silence was sharper than any blade. That doubt, once planted, grows on its own, and Dominic had watered it. Every time he nodded, every time he believed, he thought he was protecting his family. Instead, he had invited the wolf inside and handed her the keys. His fist slammed against the desk. The monitors flickered. "What else did I miss?" he thought. His jaw clenched so tight it ached. "What else has she done while I was too blind to see?" Dominic forced himself to keep watching. The memories of Victoria's whispered lies still burned fresh in his mind. But he couldn't stop now. He needed to see everything. He needed to know exactly what his absence had allowed to flourish. The afternoon footage loaded on the center screen, and what he saw made his blood turn to ice. Victoria had gathered Lucas and Mia in the living room. She sat on the velvet armchair, the one that had belonged to Isabella, the one Dominic never let anyone else use, and crossed her legs like a queen settling onto her throne. The children stood before her, not sitting, standing, like soldiers awaiting orders. Through the hallway camera, Dominic could see Elena. She stood just outside the doorway, close enough to hear, far enough to be invisible. Her hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles white. Her jaw was tight. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't cross that threshold. She was the help. She had no power here. Victoria's voice drifted through the speakers, sweet as honey poured over broken glass. "Now, children, we need to have a little talk about your father." Lucas shifted his weight. Mia's fingers found the hem of her dress and twisted it nervously. "Daddy is very, very busy," Victoria continued, leaning forward with a smile that showed too many teeth. "He has important work to do, grown-up work. And when grown-ups are busy, do you know what good children do? Silence. They don't bother them." Victoria's smile widened. "They don't call. They don't cry. They don't ask silly questions. Because if they do, Daddy might not come back at all." Mia's lower lip trembled. "But I miss him." Victoria's eyes flickered just for a second with something cold. Something sharp. "Missing someone isn't an excuse to be selfish, Mia. Your father works hard so you can live in this beautiful house, wear nice clothes, have nice things. The least you can do is be grateful." She reached out and patted Mia's cheek. The gesture looked gentle, but the little girl flinched like she'd been slapped. "If you're good," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Victoria will buy you new toys. Anything you want. But only if you're good. Only if you don't make trouble." Lucas spoke up, his voice small but steady. "When is Dad coming back?" Victoria turned to him slowly. Her smile didn't falter, but something behind her eyes shifted, hardened. "When you deserve it." 3 words. That was all. But Dominic watched his son's face crumble, watched the hope drain out of those young eyes. watched an 8-year-old boy learn that his father's love was conditional, that it had to be earned, measured, rationed. A lie, a poisonous, devastating lie, and Victoria delivered it with the same smile she used when she kissed Dominic goodnight. In the hallway, Elena's hands tightened into fists. Her whole body leaned toward the doorway like a rope pulled taut. Every muscle screamed at her to walk in, to scoop up those children, to shield them from the venom dripping from Victoria's perfect lips. But she didn't move. She couldn't, because she was nobody. A housekeeper, a servant. If she stepped in now, Victoria would have her fired within the hour. And then who would protect Lucas and Mia? So Elena stood there, frozen, helpless, watching 2 children she loved being slowly broken by a woman who saw them as nothing but obstacles. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. On the screen, Victoria stood and smoothed her dress. "Run along now," she said dismissively. "Elena will give you lunch. And remember, not a word to your father. This is our little secret." The children walked out in silence. No protest, no questions. They had learned, just like Victoria wanted. Mia passed Elena in the hallway. The little girl didn't look up, didn't reach for her hand. But Dominic saw her shoulders shaking, saw her tiny chest heaving with sobs that made no sound. She was crying, silently, invisibly, like a child who had been taught that her tears didn't matter. Dominic's hand shot out and grabbed the edge of the desk. His knuckles went white. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. The rage inside him was a living thing, a beast clawing at his ribs, demanding release. He wanted to put his fist through the screen. He wanted to storm upstairs and drag Victoria out by her hair. He wanted to burn down everything he'd built if it meant his children would never feel this way again. But he forced himself to stay still. Not yet, he told himself, his teeth grinding together. Not yet. He needed more. He needed to see exactly how deep this betrayal went. And then, only then, would he make Victoria Ashford pay for every single tear. Night fell over Crane Estate like a heavy curtain. Dominic watched Victoria emerge from the master bedroom, dressed in a black cocktail dress, diamonds glittering at her throat. She checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusted a single strand of hair, and smiled at herself with satisfaction. Then she walked out the front door, without a backward glance. No goodbye to the children, no instructions to Elena, not even a pretense of care. The sound of her car fading into the distance was the loneliest sound Dominic had ever heard. And suddenly, the mansion felt enormous, empty, a hollow shell filled with shadows and silence. But on the second-floor camera, something moved. Elena climbed the stairs slowly, carrying a small wooden tray, 2 cups of warm milk, a plate of cookies arranged in a careful circle, a folded napkin with tiny embroidered flowers, something Isabella had made years ago, something Dominic thought had been lost. She stopped outside the children's bedroom door and knocked softly. 3 gentle taps, a pattern, a signal. The door cracked open. Lucas peered out, his eyes red and swollen. Behind him, Mia huddled on the bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "It's just me," Elena whispered. "Can I come in?" Lucas glanced back at his sister, then opened the door wider. Elena stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She set the tray on the nightstand and knelt down so she was eye level with both children. "I brought warm milk," she said gently, "and cookies, the ones with cinnamon and brown sugar." Mia's head lifted slightly. "Like Mommy used to make?" Elena's smile was soft, tender, full of a love that asked for nothing in return. "Just like your mommy used to make. She taught me the recipe, you know, before she went to heaven." Mia crawled off the bed and crossed the room. For a moment, she just stood there, looking up at Elena with eyes too old for her 6 years. Then she threw her arms around Elena's neck and held on like she was drowning. Elena wrapped her arms around the little girl, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other rubbing slow circles on her back. "I've got you," she murmured. "I've got you, sweetheart." Lucas watched from the doorway. His jaw was tight. His hands were clenched. He was trying so hard to be strong, to be the man of the house, to protect his little sister the way he thought his father would want. But he was 8 years old, and the weight was crushing him. Elena looked up and met his eyes. She didn't tell him to cry. She didn't tell him it was okay to be weak. She just patted the spot on the floor beside her. Lucas hesitated. Then his shoulders dropped, and he walked over and sat down. He picked up a cookie, took a bite, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled. Small, fragile, but real. They sat together on the floor, drinking warm milk and eating cookies that tasted like memory. Elena told them stories, not fairy tales, but real ones. Stories about their mother, About the time Isabella burned an entire batch of pancakes and laughed so hard she cried. About how she used to dance in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. The children listened with wide eyes and hungry hearts. This was what they needed. Not toys, not promises. Just someone who remembered their mother and made her feel close again. When the cups were empty and the plate was bare, Elena tucked them both into Lucas's bed. Mia curled against her brother's side. Lucas's arm wrapped around her protectively. Elena pulled the blanket up to their chins and smoothed the hair from their foreheads. Then she leaned close and whispered, "Listen to me carefully. Both of you." The children's eyes fixed on her face. "If anything ever happens, anything at all, I want you to run to the bathroom and lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or your father. Do you understand?" Lucas nodded slowly. "Why?" Elena hesitated. "How do you explain danger to a child without terrifying them?" "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "the world gets scary, and when it does, you need a safe place. The bathroom door has a strong lock. You wait there until someone you trust comes for you." Mia's small hand found Elena's. "Will you come for us?" Elena squeezed her fingers gently. "Always. I will always come for you." She kissed their foreheads, turned off the lamp, and slipped out of the room. In the basement, Dominic sat frozen. The footage had ended, but he didn't move to switch cameras. He just stared at the dark screen, his chest tight, his eyes burning. He rewound the footage, watched it again. The milk, the cookies, the stories about Isabella, the way Elena held Mia like she was precious, the way she made Lucas smile, the whispered instructions about the bathroom, the promise to always come. He watched it a third time, and something inside him cracked open. He had hired Elena Martinez to clean his house and watch his children when he couldn't. He had paid her a salary and expected nothing more than professional competence. But this woman, this quiet, invisible woman he barely noticed, had been doing something far greater. She had been keeping his children alive, not just their bodies, their spirits, their hope. Every night, while he was gone and Victoria was tearing them down, Elena had been building them back up, cookie by cookie, story by story, whisper by whisper. And he never knew. He never even thought to ask. Dominic pressed his palms against his eyes and breathed. How do you thank someone for saving what matters most? He didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing for certain. Elena Martinez would never stand in a hallway again, powerless, watching his children suffer, not while he still drew breath. The house had been silent for hours. Dominic sat in the basement, fighting exhaustion, fighting the urge to storm upstairs and end this charade right now. But he needed to wait. He needed to see everything Victoria was capable of. He didn't have to wait long. At 2 a.m, the motion sensor on the hallway camera flickered to life. Victoria moved through the darkness like a ghost. She had returned from her evening out sometime after midnight, slipping through the front door without a sound. Dominic had watched her check on the children's room not to see if they were safe, but to make sure they were asleep. Now she crept down the second-floor hallway, barefoot, her heels dangling from one hand. No click of stilettos to announce her presence. No sound at all. She stopped outside Dominic's study. The door was locked. It was always locked. But Victoria reached into her silk robe and pulled out a small brass key, a key Dominic had never given her. A key that should have been impossible to copy. She slid it into the lock and turned. The door swung open without a whisper. Dominic leaned forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The study camera showed Victoria crossing to his desk. She didn't hesitate. She didn't search. She moved with purpose, like someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times. Behind his desk, hidden in the wall, was a safe. Only 3 people knew the combination: Dominic, his late wife Isabella, and Marcus, his most trusted lieutenant. Victoria knelt before it and began pressing buttons. 1, 7, 0, 4. Isabella's birthday. The safe clicked open. Dominic's blood ran cold. He had never told Victoria that combination. He had never even mentioned the safe's existence. Yet here she was, opening it like she owned every secret in his life. How long had she been watching him? How many times had she stood behind him, memorizing his movements, cataloging his weaknesses? The safe door swung wide. Inside were documents, cash, a handgun he kept for emergencies, and a small velvet box. Victoria's hand went straight for it. The box was old, worn at the edges. The velvet had faded from years of being held, opened, closed, held again. Inside was a diamond ring, not just any ring. Isabella's engagement ring, the one Dominic had slipped onto her finger 12 years ago, when he was still a young man with dreams bigger than his bank account. The one she had worn every day of their marriage, the one he had removed from her hand the morning she died. It was the only thing he had left of her that still felt alive. Victoria lifted it from the box and held it up to the dim light. The diamond caught a sliver of moonlight from the window and sparkled like a tiny star trapped in her palm. She studied it for a long moment. Her expression wasn't greedy. It wasn't admiring. It was calculating. Then she smiled. Perfect, she whispered to herself. Absolutely perfect. She tucked the ring into her pocket, closed the safe, and left the study without a trace. The cameras followed her downstairs, past the kitchen, past the living room, down the narrow hallway that led to the staff quarters. Elena's room was small, simple. A bed, a dresser, a nightstand with a lamp, and a worn paperback novel. Nothing valuable, nothing worth stealing. Victoria opened the door slowly, checking to make sure Elena was asleep. She was. Her breathing was soft and even. Her dark hair spilled across the pillow. She looked peaceful, innocent, completely unaware of the predator standing 3 feet away. Victoria crossed to the dresser and eased open the top drawer. Inside were Elena's clothes, simple things, carefully folded. Cotton shirts, faded sweaters, nothing expensive, nothing new. Victoria reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. For just a moment, she held it up again. The diamond seemed to glow in the darkness, a fragment of light that had once symbolized love, now being used as a weapon. Then she buried it deep beneath the folded clothes and pushed the drawer shut. "Done," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tomorrow, you disappear from this house forever." She turned and walked out, closing the door behind her with the softest click. Elena never stirred. In the basement, Dominic rose from his chair so fast it scraped against the concrete floor. His hands were shaking. His entire body was shaking. Not from fear, not from shock, from rage. Pure, incandescent, volcanic rage. He had watched this woman, this serpent he had invited into his home, into his bed, into his children's lives, steal the last piece of his wife. He had watched her plant it like evidence. He had watched her smile in the darkness, confident that no one would ever know. But he knew. He had seen everything. Every step, every touch, every whispered word of her plan. And now he understood exactly what Victoria Ashford intended to do. She was going to accuse Elena of theft. She was going to destroy an innocent woman, to remove the only obstacle between herself and total control of this house. Dominic's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow, Victoria would discover that she wasn't the only one who could set a trap, and hers had just snapped shut. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Crane Estate, painting golden rectangles across the marble floors. It should have been a beautiful morning. Birds sang in the garden. The air smelled of fresh coffee and spring flowers. But beauty can be deceiving, and this morning was about to turn into a nightmare. Victoria descended the staircase at precisely 8:15. She had timed it perfectly. The children would be finishing breakfast. Elena would be cleaning. The house would be full of witnesses. Her performance began before her foot touched the bottom step. "Oh my God!" Her voice cracked. Her hand flew to her chest. "Oh my God! No, 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 no." She stumbled into the foyer. Her face pale, her eyes wide with manufactured horror. She looked like a woman who had just discovered something terrible, something unthinkable. Elena emerged from the dining room, cloth in hand, her expression immediately concerned. "Miss Ashford? What's wrong?" Victoria spun toward her, and for a split second so fast that only someone watching very closely would catch it, her eyes flickered with something cold. Then the mask slammed back into place. "The ring," Victoria gasped, pressing her palm against her forehead. "Isabella's ring. It's gone. It's gone from the safe." Lucas and Mia came running from the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. They stopped in the doorway, their small faces tight with confusion and fear. "What happened?" Lucas asked. Victoria rushed toward him, dropping to her knees, gathering both children against her chest in a display of protective concern. "Someone took something very precious," she said, her voice trembling. "Something that belonged to your mother. I'm so sorry, darlings. I'm so sorry you have to see this." Mia's lip wobbled. "Mommy's ring?" "Yes, sweetheart." Victoria stroked her hair with exaggerated tenderness. "The ring your daddy gave her. The one he kept in his safe. It's been stolen." Elena stood frozen in the doorway, the cleaning cloth hanging limp in her hand. Her face had gone pale, not with guilt, but with dawning understanding. She knew what was coming. Victoria rose slowly, wiping tears from her cheeks that had never quite fallen. She turned to face Elena, and the transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture straightened, her chin lifted, Her eyes hardened into chips of polished ice. "Elena," she said, her voice now steady, controlled. "We need to search the house. Every room, every closet, every bag." Elena met her gaze without flinching. "Of course, Miss Ashford. I have nothing to hide. I'm sure you don't." Victoria's smile was thin as a blade. "But we must be thorough. For the children's safety. You understand." The words dripped with false concern. For the children's safety. As if Elena were a threat. As if Elena were the danger in this house. Lucas stepped forward, his small hand finding Elena's. His fingers wrapped around hers and held tight. "Elena didn't take anything," he said, his young voice firm with conviction. "She would never steal. She's not like that." Victoria's expression flickered. Annoyance, irritation, a crack in the perfect mask. She knelt down again, bringing herself to Lucas's eye level, and spoke in that honeyed tone that made Dominic's skin crawl. "Sweetheart, you're too young to understand. Sometimes people aren't who they seem. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us." She glanced at Elena with a look of practiced sympathy. "I'm not accusing anyone. I just want to find the truth." Lucas didn't waver. "I know the truth. Elena takes care of us. She loves us." Something dark passed across Victoria's face. A shadow of rage, quickly suppressed. She stood abruptly and smoothed her dress. "We'll see." She turned to Elena with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Bring your bag to the living room. All of it. Everything you own in this house." Elena's jaw tightened. Her hand squeezed Lucas's once, gently, before releasing it. "As you wish, Miss Ashford." She walked toward her room with measured steps. Calm, dignified, refusing to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. But Mia began to cry. Soft, hiccuping sobs that she tried to muffle with her hands. She didn't understand what was happening, but she understood enough. She understood that something bad was coming, that Elena might go away. Lucas wrapped his arm around his sister's shoulders, glaring at Victoria with 8 years of suppressed anger burning in his eyes. Victoria ignored them both. She stood in the center of the foyer, arms crossed, watching Elena's retreating figure with the patience of a spider watching a fly walk into its web. In the basement, Dominic watched the screen. His finger hovered over his phone. One call to Marcus, and this would all end. He could storm upstairs right now and tear Victoria's performance to shreds, but not yet. He needed her to commit fully. He needed her to pull out that ring with her own hands, to make her accusation with her own lips. He needed everyone to see exactly who Victoria Ashford really was, and then he would show her what happened to people who tried to destroy his family. Elena returned to the living room carrying a worn canvas bag. It wasn't much. Everything she owned in this world fit inside that single bag: a few changes of clothes, some toiletries, a photograph of her grandmother, a rosary that had belonged to her mother, the possessions of a woman who had learned long ago not to accumulate things. Things could be taken, things could be lost. Better to travel light through a world that had never promised her anything. She set the bag on the mahogany coffee table and stepped back. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Check everything. I have nothing to hide." Victoria circled the table like a predator approaching wounded prey. Her heels clicked against the hardwood. Her eyes never left Elena's face, searching for cracks, for fear, for any sign of weakness. She found none. Elena stood with her shoulders square, her chin lifted, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She looked like a woman facing a firing squad, not with terror, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had already made peace with whatever came next. It infuriated Victoria. The children huddled near the doorway. Lucas had positioned himself slightly in front of Mia, his small body a shield between his sister and the ugliness unfolding in the room. Mia clutched his arm, her face streaked with tears she couldn't stop. Victoria unzipped the bag with theatrical slowness. She pulled out a sweater, examined it, set it aside, a pair of jeans, turned the pockets inside out, dropped them on the floor. A worn Bible. She flipped through the pages, checking for hidden compartments, her lip curling with disdain. "You certainly don't have much," Victoria murmured. "One might wonder what you've been spending your salary on." Elena said nothing. Victoria's hands dove deeper into the bag. Socks, underwear, a small wooden jewelry box that contained nothing but a cheap silver chain. For a moment, just a moment, doubt flickered across her face. The ring should have been easy to find. She had hidden it near the top. Then her fingers brushed velvet. Victoria's hand emerged, holding a small black box. The room went silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Victoria held the box up, turning it slowly so everyone could see. Her expression shifted from manufactured confusion to manufactured shock to manufactured horror, each transition smooth, rehearsed, perfect. "What is this?" she whispered. She opened the lid. The diamond caught the morning light and exploded into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Isabella's ring. The ring Dominic had kept locked in his safe for 3 years. The ring that represented everything he had lost. Victoria gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God." Her voice cracked with false emotion. This is Isabella's ring. The ring from the safe." She looked up at Elena, eyes glistening with tears that refused to actually fall. "It was in your bag. You stole it." Elena's face went pale. Not with guilt, with the sudden, sickening realization of how thoroughly she had been trapped. "I didn't take that," she said, her voice still calm but now edged with urgency. "I have never seen that ring before in my life. Someone put it there. Someone put it there?" Victoria's laugh was brittle, incredulous. Who? Who would do such a thing? You. The word hung in the air like a blade. Victoria's eyes widened. Then her expression hardened into cold fury disguised as righteous indignation. "How dare you? How dare you accuse me after what you've done? You've been stealing from this family. You've been manipulating these children. And now you stand there and lie to my face?" Mia burst into sobs, her small body shaking. "No, Elena didn't do it. She didn't." Lucas's voice rose above his sister's cries, sharp and fierce. "Elena would never steal. She loves us. You're the one who's lying." Victoria spun toward him, her mask slipping for just a second. "Be quiet, Lucas. You're a child. You don't understand. I understand enough," Lucas shouted. "I understand that you're mean when Dad isn't here. I understand that Elena is the only one who takes care of us. She didn't do this." Victoria's face flushed red, her hands clenched at her sides. For a moment, it looked like she might strike him. Then she composed herself, smoothing her features back into sorrowful concern. "Poor darling," she cooed. "She's manipulated you so completely. But don't worry. Once she's gone, everything will be better." She turned back to Elena, triumph glittering in her eyes. "Do you have anything to say for yourself? Any explanation for why a ring worth $200,000 was hidden in your belongings?" Elena opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, the front door burst open. Dominic Crane stepped into the foyer. He was still wearing the suit he'd left in yesterday. His jaw was dark with stubble. His eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night, spent watching screens in a cold basement. But those eyes, those cold, calculating, merciless eyes were fixed directly on Victoria, and in them burned a fury that could melt steel. The room froze. Victoria's triumphant smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, just enough to show that somewhere deep inside, she sensed that something had gone terribly wrong. "Dominic," she breathed, forcing brightness into her voice. "You're back early. I know exactly what you were doing." His voice was quiet, controlled, deadly, and Victoria Ashford felt, for the first time, the cold touch of fear. Victoria recovered quickly. She was good at this, the rapid recalculation, the instant adjustment of masks. Years of navigating her father's world had taught her to pivot without hesitation, to turn any situation to her advantage. She spun toward Dominic with a brilliant smile, her arms already opening for an embrace. "Darling, you're home early." Her voice sparkled with manufactured delight. "I was just handling a terrible situation. You won't believe what I found in Elena's quiet." One word. That was all it took. The single syllable cut through the air like a guillotine blade. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't snarled, it was spoken softly, almost gently, and that made it infinitely more terrifying. Victoria's mouth snapped shut. Her arms froze mid-gesture, then slowly lowered to her sides. The room had turned to ice. Dominic walked forward with measured steps. His shoes echoed against the marble floor, each footfall deliberate, unhurried, like a judge approaching the bench. His eyes never left Victoria's face, cataloging every micro-expression, every flicker of uncertainty she tried to hide. He stopped in front of her and held out his hand. "Give me the ring." Victoria hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then she placed the velvet box in his palm, her fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. "Of course, darling. I was just keeping it safe. You should know that, Elena," I said quiet. Victoria's jaw clenched. A muscle twitched beneath her eye, but she obeyed. Dominic opened the box and looked at the ring inside. Isabella's ring, the diamond that had once symbolized everything pure and good in his life. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he closed the box and set it gently on the coffee table, as if it were made of glass, as if it might shatter at the slightest impact. When he looked up again, His eyes had changed. The cold detachment had given way to something darker, something that made even the air feel heavy. "You're good," he said quietly. "I'll give you that." The performance was nearly flawless. Victoria's smile flickered back to life, though it looked more fragile now. "Performance? Dominic, I don't know what you're talking about. I found the ring in her bag. I saw it with my own eyes. She must have 217 A.M. The words stopped her cold. "What?" Dominic reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. The screen glowed to life in his hand. 217 A.M., he repeated, his voice flat. "That's when you entered my study, using a key I never gave you, to open a safe whose combination you were never supposed to know." He turned the phone around so everyone could see. On the screen, security footage played in crisp, damning detail. Victoria, creeping through the darkened hallway. Victoria, unlocking the study door. Victoria, kneeling before the safe and punching in the code. Victoria, lifting Isabella's ring from its velvet nest and holding it up to the light with a smile of pure satisfaction. The footage continued. Victoria descending the stairs. Victoria entering Elena's room. Victoria opening the dresser drawer and burying the ring beneath folded clothes. And finally, Victoria's whispered words, captured perfectly by the sensitive microphones embedded in the surveillance system. "Done. Tomorrow, you disappear from this house forever." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the soft hum of the phone's speaker as the footage looped back to the beginning. Victoria's face had drained of all color. Her carefully constructed mask lay in ruins at her feet. And beneath it was something raw and ugly, the face of a woman who had just realized her trap had snapped shut around her own neck. That's not. She struggled to form words. "Someone edited that. Someone faked. The cameras are tamper-proof," Dominic said calmly. "Time-stamped. Encrypted. Backed up to 3 separate servers. Would you like me to have our tech team verify the footage in front of you?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Dominic, please." Her voice cracked. Real desperation now, bleeding through the cracks in her composure. "Let me explain. I was trying to protect you. Elena has been manipulating the children. She's been turning them against me. I had to. You had to frame an innocent woman for theft." Dominic's voice remained terrifyingly calm. "You had to terrorize my children when you thought I wasn't watching. You had to steal my dead wife's ring and use it as a weapon." He took one step closer. Victoria took one step back. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug. She stumbled slightly, catching herself on the arm of a chair. Her eyes darted toward the door, calculating escape routes, finding none. "I can explain everything," she whispered. "Just give me a chance. I love you. I love the children. Everything I did was for this family." Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was not a forgiving smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent his entire adult life navigating a world of liars and criminals, and had finally caught the most dangerous one of all, sleeping in his bed. "You should have remembered something," he said softly. Victoria's voice was barely audible. "What?" Dominic leaned close enough to whisper in her ear. "I see everything in my own house." Victoria's legs nearly buckled beneath her. For the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be prey. Dominic was about to speak again when a small body collided with his legs. Lucas had broken away from the doorway and run across the room, not to his father, but to Elena. He pressed himself against her side, one arm wrapped around her waist, his chin lifted in defiance. Then he turned to face Dominic. "Dad." His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady, the eyes of a boy who had carried too much weight for too long and was finally ready to set it down. "I need to tell you something. The truth." Dominic felt something crack inside his chest. He walked away from Victoria without a second glance. She didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except the small, brave boy standing in front of him with tears threatening to spill. Dominic knelt down slowly, bringing himself to Lucas's eye level. He didn't reach out. He didn't rush. He just waited, his full attention focused on his son. "I'm listening," he said quietly. "Tell me everything." Lucas took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. His lower lip quivered, but he didn't look away. "When you go on trips," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "Victoria changes. She's not nice anymore. She gets mean. Really mean." Dominic nodded slowly, encouraging him to continue. "She told us we couldn't call you. Ever. She said if we tried, she would know. She said she checks the phones." Lucas's breath hitched. "She said if we told you anything at all, she would make Elena leave, and then we'd be alone with her." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Dominic's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. But he kept his voice gentle. "What else, son?" Lucas glanced at Elena, drawing strength from her presence. "Elena is the only one who asks if we're okay. The only one who cares if we're scared." His voice cracked. "Victoria doesn't ask. Victoria doesn't care. She just tells us to be quiet and stay out of her way." A small hand tugged at Dominic's sleeve. Mia had crept forward, her face streaked with tears, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. She looked up at her father with eyes that had seen too much for 6 years old. "Daddy," she whispered. "Victoria makes us eat by ourselves. In our room, she says we're too messy for the dining room." Dominic felt his heart splinter. "But Elena sneaks up cookies," Mia continued, her voice growing slightly stronger. "The brown ones with the sugar and cinnamon. She says they're the same ones Mommy used to make. The same cookies, the same recipe." Dominic remembered Isabella standing in the kitchen, flour on her apron, laughing as she shaped the dough. He remembered the smell of cinnamon filling the house. He remembered Lucas and Mia sitting on the counter, licking batter from wooden spoons. And he realized that Elena had been keeping those memories alive. Every night, every cookie, every whispered story about the mother these children had lost. She had been doing what he should have been doing, what he had been too busy, too blind, too trusting to do. Dominic stood slowly. His eyes found Elena's across the room. She was still pale, still shaken, but she held his gaze without flinching. There was no accusation in her expression, no demand for apology, just quiet exhaustion and relief that the truth was finally free. Then he turned to Victoria. She had backed herself against the wall, her arms wrapped around her body, her perfect makeup now ruined by tears that streamed freely down her cheeks. Real tears, for the first time since he'd known her, but not tears of remorse. These were tears of defeat, of a plan unraveled, of a future that had just slipped through her perfectly manicured fingers. "Dominic, please." Her voice was raw, desperate. "The children don't understand. They're confused. Elena has been filling their heads with lies. I would never." "Stop." The word was quiet, final, like a door closing forever. "I've seen the footage," Dominic said. "I've heard the children. I know exactly what you've done." He took one step toward her, then another. Victoria pressed herself harder against the wall, as if she could somehow melt through it and escape. "You terrorized my children in their own home. You threatened them with abandonment. You isolated them from the one person who showed them kindness." His voice dropped lower. "And then you tried to destroy that person to cover your tracks." Victoria's tears fell faster. Her body shook with sobs that might have moved a lesser man. But Dominic Crane was not a lesser man. He had built an empire on reading people, on knowing when they were lying, on never, ever giving second chances to those who betrayed his trust. And Victoria Ashford had just betrayed everything that mattered to him. "The children were right about you," he said quietly. "Elena was right about you. The only one who was wrong was me." He turned away from her, dismissing her existence with a single motion. "But I won't be wrong again." Dominic did not raise his voice. He did not slam his fist against the wall. He did not overturn furniture or shatter glass. He did not give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. And that was what made him truly terrifying. The men who screamed were predictable. The men who raged could be manipulated, redirected, appeased. But the men who went quiet, the men who spoke in measured tones while their eyes burned with cold fire, those were the men you learned to fear. Dominic Crane was one of those men. He walked toward Victoria with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall echoed through the silent room like a countdown, like the ticking of a clock approaching midnight. Victoria pressed herself against the wall, her fingers clawing at the wallpaper behind her. Her tears had stopped. Her makeup was ruined. The sophisticated mask had crumbled completely, leaving behind a woman who suddenly understood exactly how much danger she was in. "You know who I am," Dominic said softly. His voice was low, almost gentle the way a predator might speak to prey it had already caught. "You've always known." Victoria's throat moved as she swallowed. "Dominic, please, you know what I do to people who betray me." The words hung between them like a blade suspended by a thread. Victoria shook her head frantically. "I would never betray you. I love you. Everything I did was for us, for our future. I was trying to protect you wanted my house." Dominic cut through her words like they were made of smoke. "You wanted my money. You wanted the position that came with being my wife." He stopped less than a foot away from her, close enough to see the pulse hammering in her throat, close enough to watch the fear bloom in her eyes. "But then you made a mistake," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "You touched my children. You made them afraid in their own home. You threatened to take away the one person who showed them love. His jaw tightened. That was your last mistake. Victoria's composure shattered completely. Dominic, I'm sorry. The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. I'll change. I'll be better. I'll leave Elena alone. I'll treat the children differently. Just give me another chance. Please. I'm begging you. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his sleeve. Dominic stepped back as if her touch were poison. You don't get another chance, he said quietly. Not with my family, not in my house, not in my city. He turned his head slightly toward the doorway. Marcus Drake stood there, silent as a shadow. No one had heard him enter. No one had seen him arrive. He simply materialized the way he always did when Dominic needed him, like a weapon drawn from thin air. Take her, Dominic said. She has 30 minutes to pack her things and leave Chicago. Marcus nodded once and stepped forward. Victoria's eyes went wild. She looked around the room frantically, searching for an ally, finding none. Elena stood motionless by the coffee table. The children huddled behind her, watching with expressions that mixed fear and something that looked almost like relief. You can't do this, Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking. My father won't stand for it. Do you have any idea who my family is? The Ashfords have connections that... Your father, Dominic interrupted calmly, will receive a copy of tonight's surveillance footage within the hour. Victoria's mouth snapped shut. Every frame, Dominic continued. Every word. Every moment of you creeping through my house like a thief. Every threat you made to my children. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with detached curiosity. Tell me, Victoria, when Vincent Ashford sees what his daughter really is when he watches you steal from an ally and terrorize innocent children, do you think he'll choose to protect you? Or do you think he'll cut his losses and preserve the alliance that keeps his business running? Victoria's face went white. She knew her father. She knew exactly what he would do. You're bluffing, she whispered. You wouldn't, I never bluff. The 3 words fell like stones into still water. Final, absolute, undeniable. Marcus's hand closed around Victoria's arm. She tried to twist away, but his grip was iron. 20 years of loyalty to Dominic Crane had made him immune to tears, to screaming, to desperate pleas. Let go of me. Victoria struggled uselessly against him. This isn't over. You'll regret this, Dominic. You'll regret the day you threw me away. Dominic didn't respond. He simply stood there, watching as Marcus guided her toward the door. His expression was stone. His posture was relaxed. He looked like a man watching trash being taken to the curb. At the threshold, Victoria twisted around one last time. Her eyes met Dominic's across the room. Hatred blazed in them, now pure, undiluted, venomous. The love she had claimed to feel had evaporated like morning fog, leaving behind only the ugly truth of what she really was. She opened her mouth to say something, a final curse, a parting threat, but the words never came, because Dominic had already turned away. He was walking toward his children, kneeling down to gather them in his arms, his attention completely focused on the only people in the room who mattered. Victoria no longer existed to him. She had been erased. Marcus pulled her through the door and out of the house. The last sound she made was a choked sob of rage that echoed briefly in the foyer before the heavy oak door swung shut behind her. And just like that, Victoria Ashford was gone. She did not look back. There was nothing left to look back at. The house felt different now. The air itself seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the walls. The shadows in the corners no longer held menace. The silence was no longer the silence of fear. It was simply quiet. Elena had taken the children upstairs after Victoria was escorted out. Lucas had clung to her hand the entire way, refusing to let go even when they reached the door to his room. Mia had fallen asleep in Elena's arms before they made it to the 2nd floor, exhausted by tears and trauma and the overwhelming relief of being safe. Elena had tucked them both into Lucas's bed, pulled the blankets up to their chins, and sat with them until their breathing became slow and even. Only then did she allow herself to leave. Now she stood in the living room, uncertain of what came next. Dominic sat on the sofa with his head in his hands. He hadn't moved since the children went upstairs. He hadn't spoken. He simply sat there, shoulders hunched, fingers buried in his dark hair, like a man carrying the weight of every mistake he'd ever made. Elena watched him from across the room, her hands twisting the fabric of her simple dress. She didn't know if she should stay or go. She didn't know what her place was anymore, or if she even had one. The woman who had made her life miserable was gone. The man who employed her now knew the truth. But what did that change, really? She was still the help. He was still the boss. Some distances couldn't be crossed. No matter what happened, Elena took a small step toward the doorway. Maybe it was better to leave him alone with his thoughts. Maybe she should go back to her room and pretend that tomorrow would be just another day. Don't. Dominic's voice stopped her mid-step. She turned back slowly. He had lifted his head. His eyes found hers across the dim room, and for the first time since she had come to work in this house, he looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her, like she was a person, like she mattered. Please, he said quietly. Stay. Elena hesitated, then walked to the armchair across from him and sat down on its edge. Her back was straight. Her hands were folded in her lap, the posture of a servant waiting for instructions. Old habits were hard to break. Dominic watched her for a long moment. His face was haggard. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the span of a single night. How long? He asked finally, his voice rough as gravel. How long did you have to endure this alone? Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected that question. Since she moved in, she answered quietly. 6 months, give or take. Dominic closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. 6 months, he repeated. You watched her torment my children for 6 months. You stood between them and her cruelty for 6 months. He opened his eyes. And you never said a word to me. Elena's hands tightened in her lap. I wanted to, she admitted. So many times. I wanted to walk into your office and tell you everything. But She trailed off, struggling to find words that wouldn't sound like accusations. Why didn't you? Dominic pressed gently. Elena lifted her chin. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but there was a tremor of old pain beneath the surface. Who am I to you, Mr. Crane? She met his gaze directly. I'm the housekeeper, the help. I cook meals and clean floors and wash clothes. I'm invisible. She swallowed hard. And she was your fiancée, the woman you chose to bring into your home, the woman you shared your bed with. A sad smile flickered across her lips. If I had told you what I saw, what would you have believed? My word against hers? The truth of it hung between them like a wall. Dominic said nothing for a long moment. His jaw worked silently, his hands curled into fists on his knees. Because she was right. 6 months ago, if Elena had come to him with accusations against Victoria, he would have dismissed her. He would have assumed jealousy, or misunderstanding, or simply the complaints of a servant who didn't like her employer's choice of partner. He would have believed Victoria's tears over Elena's truth. And Victoria knew it. That was why she had been so bold, so confident, so certain that she could torment the children and frame the housekeeper without consequence. Because in this house, some voices mattered more than others. Until now, Dominic stood slowly. He crossed the space between them, not with the commanding stride of a boss approaching an employee, but with the uncertain steps of a man approaching someone he had wronged. He stopped in front of Elena's chair and looked down at her. She looked up at him, and in that moment, something shifted. Some invisible barrier cracked. Some unspoken wall began to crumble. You're not invisible, Dominic said quietly. Not to me. Not anymore. Elena's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away, and Dominic Crane, for the first time in longer than he could remember, didn't know what to say next. I'm sorry. 3 words. Simple words. Common words. Words that people threw around carelessly every day, often meaning nothing at all. But from the mouth of Dominic Crane, the man who had built an empire on never showing weakness, never admitting fault, never bowing his head to anyone, those 3 words carried the weight of mountains. Elena stared at him. She had heard Dominic give orders that changed the fates of hundreds of people. She had heard him negotiate deals worth millions without a tremor in his voice. She had heard him threaten men who would terrify most people, speaking with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power he held. But she had never heard him apologize. Not once. Not to anyone. Until now. Dominic's hands hung at his sides. His shoulders, usually squared with authority, had dropped slightly. The armor he wore so naturally seemed to have cracks running through it. I left you alone in this house with an enemy, he continued, his voice low and rough. I trusted words instead of trusting my own eyes. I let a stranger poison my home while you tried to hold it together. He paused, swallowing hard. I almost lost my children because of my blindness, because I was too busy, too distracted, too willing to believe that the woman in my bed was the woman she pretended to be. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever acknowledged her pain, her sacrifice, her silent struggle. She had spent so long being invisible that being seen felt almost unbearable. Dominic turned slightly, his gaze falling on the velvet box still sitting on the coffee table. Isabella's ring. The diamond caught the lamplight and glittered softly, like a star that refused to be extinguished. Isabella would hate me for this, he said quietly. If she knew what happened under this roof, if she knew what our children went through while I was away. His voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough to show that beneath the stone exterior, something human still remained. She trusted me to protect them, and I failed. Elena rose from her chair. She didn't know what possessed her to move. She only knew that she couldn't sit there and watch this man, this powerful, untouchable man, break apart in front of her without doing something. No, she said softly. Dominic looked at her, surprised by the firmness in her voice. Isabella wouldn't hate you, Elena continued. She would be proud. Dominic shook his head. Proud of what? I let a monster into our home. You came back. Elena took a step closer. You could have gotten on that plane. You could have believed Victoria's lies. You could have let her destroy me and never known the truth. Her voice strengthened. But you didn't. Something told you to stay. Something told you to watch. And when you saw what was happening, you didn't hesitate. You protected your children. You protected me. She gestured toward the velvet box. That ring belonged to a woman who loved you. A woman who chose you. Do you really think she would be disappointed that you made a mistake? Or would she be grateful that you found the courage to fix it? Dominic stared at her. No one spoke to him this way. No one challenged his self-condemnation. No one offered him grace when he was drowning in guilt. But here was this woman, this quiet, invisible woman he had overlooked for years, standing in front of him and refusing to let him destroy himself. A long silence stretched between them. The house creaked softly around them. Somewhere upstairs, one of the children murmured in their sleep. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Finally, Dominic spoke. You see things, he said slowly. Things other people miss. You understand things that most people never bother to notice. Elena lowered her eyes. I just pay attention. No. Dominic shook his head. It's more than that. You care, even when no one asks you to, even when it costs you everything. He took a breath. Isabella was like that. She saw people really saw them. She made everyone feel like they mattered, even when the world told them they didn't. His eyes met Elena's. I think she would have liked you very much. Elena's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, forcing back the tears that threatened to spill. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than you know. Dominic straightened slowly. Some of the weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. Not all of it, perhaps not even most of it, but enough. Enough to let him breathe. Enough to let him think about tomorrow instead of drowning in yesterday. I want you to stay, he said. Elena tensed. Mr. Crane, I don't expect. Not because I'm ordering you to. He cut her off gently. Not because it's your job. Not because I'm paying you. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Something soft. Something almost vulnerable. The children need you, he said quietly. They love you. You've been their anchor through all of this. He paused. And I think maybe this house needs you too. Elena's breath caught. She had come to this mansion 2 years ago, with nothing but a worn suitcase and a desperate need for work. She had expected to be invisible. She had expected to serve and clean and disappear into the background of other people's lives. She had never expected to matter. But standing here now, in the quiet aftermath of chaos, she realized that somewhere along the way, without meaning to, without asking for anything, she had become part of something bigger than herself. She had become part of a family. Okay, she said softly. I'll stay. Dominic nodded once. And for the first time that night, something like peace settled over Crane Estate. No one slept that night. Not really. Not the deep, peaceful sleep of people who felt safe in their beds. Too much had happened. Too many wounds had been opened. Too many truths had been dragged into the light. The children had woken shortly after midnight, crying out from nightmares that chased them even in sleep. Elena had gone to them immediately, gathering them in her arms, whispering soft reassurances into their hair. But they refused to go back to their room. Please, Lucas had begged, his voice small and broken. Can we stay with you? Just tonight? Elena had looked at Dominic, uncertain. He was their father. This was his decision. Dominic had simply nodded. They ended up in the family room, a space that had rarely been used since Isabella's death. The large sectional sofa was soft and deep, covered in blankets that still smelled faintly of the lavender fabric softener Isabella had always insisted on. Elena sat in the center, her back against the cushions, Mia curled against her left side, small fingers clutching Elena's sleeve even in sleep. Lucas pressed against her right, his head on her shoulder, trying so hard to be brave even as his body trembled with exhaustion. Elena's arms wrapped around them both, holding them close, keeping them anchored to something real and warm and safe. Dominic sat in the armchair across from them. He didn't speak. He didn't try to take over or assert his place as their father. He simply sat there in the darkness, watching over them like a sentinel, like a guardian who had failed once and was determined never to fail again. The hours passed slowly. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, moonlight filtered through the curtains, painting silver patterns on the carpet. The house settled and creaked, old bones adjusting to the quiet. Mia stirred in her sleep. "Don't go," she whimpered, her voice barely audible. "Please don't go." Elena's heart clenched. She stroked the little girl's hair, smoothing the tangles away from her face. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." Mia's breathing steadied. Her grip on Elena's sleeve loosened slightly, though she didn't let go completely. Even in sleep, she needed that connection, that reassurance that when she woke up, someone would still be there. Dominic watched from his chair. The scene before him blurred slightly, and he blinked hard against the burning in his eyes. He remembered this. He remembered Isabella doing exactly this, sitting on this same sofa, holding these same children, whispering these same words. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." How many nights had Isabella spent like this? How many nightmares had she soothed? How many tears had she dried while he was away, building an empire that suddenly seemed so meaningless? And now here was Elena, a woman with no obligation to love his children, a woman who could have walked away at any moment, a woman who had stayed, even when staying meant suffering. She held them the way Isabella used to hold them, with fierce tenderness, with quiet strength, with a love that asked for nothing in return. Around 2 a.m, Lucas's eyes fluttered open. He blinked in the darkness, disoriented, then saw his father sitting across from him. For a long moment, father and son simply looked at each other. "Dad?" Lucas's voice was rough with sleep. "You're still here?" Dominic leaned forward slightly. "I'm here. Aren't you tired?" "A little." Lucas processed this, his young mind working through the implications. "Why don't you sleep?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Lucas had ever heard it. "I'm watching over you," he said simply, "making sure you're safe." Lucas considered this. His eyes drifted to Elena, still holding him and Mia, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. "Like Elena does?" The question hit Dominic like a punch to the chest. Like Elena does, because Elena had been the one watching over them. Elena had been the one staying up late, checking on them, making sure they felt safe when the world seemed dark and dangerous. Elena had been doing his job. "Yes," Dominic said quietly, "like Elena does." Lucas nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied something deep inside him. Then his eyes began to droop again. "Dad? Yes? I'm glad you came back." The words were simple, the words of a tired child, but they carried more weight than any business deal, any alliance, any amount of money could ever carry. Dominic's throat tightened. "Me too, son. Me too." Lucas's eyes closed. Within moments, his breathing had slowed back into the rhythm of sleep. The night stretched on. Dominic didn't move from his chair. He watched over them, all 3 of them, as the hours crept toward dawn. He watched Elena hold his children with a mother's care. He watched Lucas and Mia sleep peacefully for the first time in months. And somewhere in the quiet darkness, something inside him began to heal. Not completely. Not yet. Some wounds took years to mend, but the first stitches had been placed. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, painting the room in shades of pink and gold, all 4 of them were still there, together, a family broken, battered, but still standing. And for the first time in longer than Dominic could remember, that felt like enough. 3 days passed. The mansion slowly began to breathe again. Laughter returned to the hallways, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Lucas and Mia smiled more easily now. They ran through the rooms without flinching at shadows. They called for Elena without fear that someone would punish them for it. Dominic came home earlier each evening. He ate dinner with his children. He read bedtime stories. He did the things he should have been doing all along, the things he had let slip away in the pursuit of power and profit. For the first time in months, Crane Estate felt like a home. But peace, in Dominic's world, was always temporary. Marcus appeared in the doorway of Dominic's study on the 3rd afternoon. His face was tight, his jaw was clenched, He moved with the careful deliberation of a man carrying bad news, the kind of news that couldn't be softened or delayed. Dominic looked up from the documents spread across his desk. One glance at Marcus told him everything he needed to know. What happened? Marcus stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Vincent Ashford," he said, "Victoria's father. He's not happy." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. He received the video. He did. Marcus hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "He watched it, all of it, and then he called me. And," Marcus's jaw tightened further, "he says his daughter was manipulated, deceived. He claims Victoria would never have done those things on her own." Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so?" "He has a theory." Marcus's voice dropped. "He believes Elena is responsible, that she seduced you, that she turned you against Victoria deliberately to take her place." The silence that followed was absolute. Dominic sat perfectly still, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes, a cold fire that burned without smoke. "He's blaming Elena," Dominic said slowly, "for his daughter's crimes. Worse than that." Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a cream-colored envelope. Heavy paper, expensive, the kind used for formal correspondence between powerful men. He placed it on the desk in front of Dominic. "He sent this an hour ago. It's an ultimatum." Dominic picked up the envelope. He didn't open it immediately. He simply held it, feeling its weight, studying the elegant script of his name written across the front. Vincent Ashford's handwriting, precise, controlled, the penmanship of a man who believed he still held power in this situation. Finally, Dominic broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. His eyes moved across the words. His expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened as his grip tightened on the paper. When he finished reading, he looked up at Marcus. "He wants me to hand over Elena." His voice was flat, deadly calm. "He wants to deal with her himself, to restore his family's honor." Marcus nodded grimly. "If you refuse, he terminates the alliance. All business between the Ashford and Crane organizations ends immediately." "What else?" "He implies there will be consequences. He doesn't specify what kind." Dominic set the letter down on his desk. He stared at it for a long moment, as if he could burn it with his gaze alone. The Ashford alliance was valuable. 15 years of partnership, shared territories, mutual protection, millions of dollars in joint operations. Losing it would cost him. Badly. And Vincent knew that. He was betting that Dominic would make the practical choice, the business choice. That he would sacrifice one insignificant housekeeper to preserve an empire. Dominic stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the garden below. Elena was there with Lucas and Mia, helping them plant flowers in the beds that had been neglected since Isabella died. The children were laughing. Elena was smiling. Sunlight caught her dark hair and made it shine. She had no idea that a powerful man had just demanded her head. She had no idea that her life was being weighed against profit margins and alliance agreements. Dominic watched her for a long moment. Then he turned back to Marcus. "You know what this means?" Marcus said quietly. "If you refuse, Vincent will consider it a declaration of war. I know. He has resources, connections. He could make things very difficult. I know." Marcus studied his boss, his friend, with careful eyes. "What do you want to do?" Dominic walked back to his desk. He picked up the letter, the expensive paper crinkling slightly in his grip. Then, with deliberate slowness, he tore it in half, and then in half again, and again. The pieces fluttered to the desk like dead leaves. "Tell Vincent Ashford," Dominic said, his voice cold as winter steel, "that the alliance is over. Tell him that if he threatens anyone under my protection again, I will consider it an act of war against me personally." He looked up at Marcus, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had clawed his way to the top of a brutal world and intended to stay there. "And tell him that Elena Martinez is not a bargaining chip. She is family, and I protect my family." Marcus nodded once, a ghost of satisfaction crossing his weathered face. "I'll deliver the message myself." He turned and left the study. Dominic stood alone in the silence, looking down at the torn pieces of paper scattered across his desk. The choice had been easy, easier than breathing. The knock on Elena's door came an hour later. She was folding laundry, a task that always calmed her mind, the repetitive motions giving her hands something to do while her thoughts wandered. The children were napping, exhausted from their morning in the garden, and the house had settled into afternoon stillness. "Elena," Marcus's voice through the door. "Mr. Crane wants to see you in his study." Her hands froze mid-fold. In 2 years of working at Crane Estate, she had been summoned to Dominic's study exactly 3 times. Once when she was hired, once when she received a raise, and once when Isabella died, to discuss the children's new routine. A fourth summons could only mean trouble. "I'll be right there," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. She smoothed her hair, straightened her simple blouse, and walked toward whatever waited for her behind that heavy oak door. The study was warm with afternoon light. Dominic stood by the window when she entered, his back to the door, his silhouette dark against the golden glow. He didn't turn around immediately. "Close the door," he said quietly. "Please." Elena obeyed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then Dominic turned. His face was serious but not angry. His eyes held something she couldn't quite identify. Concern, perhaps. Or determination. "Sit down," he said, and his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. Gentle, almost, as if he were about to deliver news that might break her. Elena lowered herself into the leather chair across from his desk. Her hands rested on her thighs, fingers interlaced to keep them from trembling. Dominic didn't sit behind his desk. Instead, he pulled a chair around and sat facing her, close enough that their knees almost touched, close enough that she could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Dominic took a breath. "Victoria's father, Vincent Ashford, has made contact. He's not happy about what happened to his daughter. He's even less happy about the video I sent him." He paused, watching her face. "He believes Victoria was manipulated, that someone turned me against her deliberately." Elena's stomach dropped. He blames you," Dominic confirmed. "He claims you seduced me, that you engineered Victoria's downfall to take her place." The blood drained from Elena's face. Her hands tightened in her lap until her knuckles went white. "That's insane," she whispered. I would never, I know." Dominic's voice was firm. "I know exactly what happened in this house, and none of it was your doing." He leaned forward slightly. "But Vincent doesn't care about truth. He cares about honor, about reputation. His daughter was humiliated, and he needs someone to blame." Elena swallowed hard. "What does he want?" Dominic's jaw tightened. "He sent me an ultimatum. Either I hand you over to him, let him deal with you however he sees fit, or the alliance between our families ends. Permanently." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena sat frozen, processing what she had just heard. A powerful man wanted her head. Her safety was being weighed against business deals and power plays. Her life was a bargaining chip in a game she had never asked to play. And the only thing standing between her and Vincent Ashford's vengeance was the man sitting in front of her. Elena rose abruptly from her chair. "I'll leave," she said, her voice cracking despite her efforts to keep it steady. "Tonight, I'll pack my things and disappear. You can tell him I ran away. You don't have to lose your alliance because of me." "Elena, I'm serious." She backed toward the door, her eyes glistening. "I've caused enough trouble for this family. I won't let you sacrifice everything you've built for a housekeeper." "Elena." Dominic stood, his voice cutting through her panic. "Stop." She froze, one hand on the doorknob. Dominic crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Do you understand me? Nowhere. But the alliance, I already ended it." Elena stared at him. "What?" "The moment I read his letter, I tore it up. The alliance is finished. I told Vincent that if he threatens anyone under my protection again, I'll consider it an act of war." Elena's mouth opened, but no words came out. "I let someone threaten my family once," Dominic continued, his voice low and intense. "I let Victoria walk into this house and terrorize the people I love. I will not make that mistake again, ever. But I'm not your family." The words came out barely louder than a breath. You're just what?" Dominic's eyes locked onto hers. "The woman who held my children when they were afraid? The woman who fed them cookies their mother used to make? The woman who stood between them and cruelty, day after day, without asking for anything in return?" His voice softened. "What do you think Lucas and Mia would say if I let you leave? What do you think they would feel if I traded your safety for a business deal?" Elena couldn't answer. The tears she had been fighting finally spilled over, sliding silently down her cheeks. "And what do you think I feel?" Dominic asked quietly. "Do you really believe I could hand you over to a man who wants to hurt you? After everything you've done for this family?" Elena shook her head slowly, unable to speak. Dominic reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was brief, careful, almost reverent. "You are family, Elena. Maybe not by law, but by every measure that actually matters." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. You're staying, and anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first." Elena stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. No one had ever protected her before. No one had ever stood between her and danger and said, "You matter," until now. 1 week passed, 7 days of cautious normalcy, 7 days of pretending the danger had passed. But Elena knew better. She had grown up in neighborhoods where threats always materialized, where warnings were never bluffs. So she watched, she waited, she kept her eyes open. And on the 7th day, her vigilance paid off. The school pickup had been routine. Lucas burst through the doors first, already talking about his science project. Mia followed, clutching a crayon drawing of their house with 4 stick figures in front. "That's you and me and Lucas and Daddy," she said proudly. Elena smiled and took their hands, chatting about their day, giving every appearance of a woman without a care. But her eyes never stopped moving. That was how she spotted the black sedan, parked at the corner, tinted windows, engine running, a silhouette in the driver's seat, facing their direction, watching. Elena's blood turned cold, but she didn't panic. She kept walking at the same steady pace, kept her voice light as she guided the children into her car. "Buckle up, little ones." She locked all the doors and pulled into traffic. The sedan followed, keeping distance, but tracking. Elena drove home by a different route. Longer, more complicated. The sedan stayed with her for 3 turns, then fell back. When she finally reached Crane Estate, her hands were shaking. "Go inside," she told the children. "Start your homework." The moment the door closed behind them, she called Marcus. 10 minutes later, security swarmed the property. Men in dark suits checked every corner, scanned every street. Marcus arrived within 20 minutes, his face grim. "Ashford's people," he said. "Testing our defenses." The black sedan did not return, but Elena knew it would. Dominic arrived home at 6 earlier than ever. Elena was in the kitchen when he appeared in the doorway, tie loosened, jaw tight. "Marcus told me." She kept stirring the sauce. "I'm fine. The children are fine." "Elena." She turned. Dominic crossed the kitchen and stopped in front of her. "Are you okay?" She nodded. But when she reached for her water glass, her fingers shook so badly that water spilled over the rim. Dominic gently took the glass from her hand and set it aside. "You don't have to be strong alone anymore," he said quietly. "Let someone carry you for once." The first tear fell before she could stop it, then another. Then she was sobbing deep, wrenching sobs releasing all the fear she had buried for years. Dominic didn't speak. He simply pulled her against his chest and held her while she broke apart. For the first time in her life, Elena let someone else be strong. Dominic was done waiting. The black sedan had crossed a line. Sending men to follow Elena while she picked up his children, that wasn't a warning. That was a declaration. He made 1 phone call, arranged 1 meeting, and prepared to end this. The restaurant was neutral territory. An upscale Italian place on the edge of the city, owned by neither family. White tablecloths, soft lighting, the kind of establishment where threats were delivered over expensive wine. Vincent Ashford was already seated when Dominic arrived, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, with cold eyes that had watched empires crumble. His suit cost more than most people earned in a month. Dominic sat down without greeting, without handshake. This was not a civilized conversation. Vincent spoke first. "You have nerve, Crane, requesting a meeting after what you did to my daughter." "What I did?" Dominic's expression didn't flicker. "I removed a liar from my home. You should be grateful I didn't do worse. Victoria made mistakes, but she didn't deserve to be thrown out like garbage. She framed an innocent woman. She terrorized my children. She stole my dead wife's ring." Dominic leaned forward. "That's not a mistake. That's betrayal." Vincent's fingers drummed the tablecloth. "What do you want? Your men away from my property, away from Elena Martinez, away from my children." "The housekeeper?" Vincent sneered. "You ended a 15-year alliance for a servant? That servant protected my children when your daughter was tormenting them. She's worth more than every deal we ever made." Vincent studied him coldly. "You're sleeping with her, aren't you?" "Careful." The word dropped like a blade. "Very careful." Dominic stood slowly. He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "Your daughter got off easy. She's alive. She's free. But if I see your men near my home again, if I hear even a whisper of a threat against Elena, I will not be generous with you. You dare threaten me? I'm promising. And you know, I keep my promises." He straightened his cuffs. "Elena Martinez is not your enemy, but I am. Remember that before your next move." Dominic walked out without looking back. Vincent sat alone for a long time. He was powerful, dangerous. He had crushed enemies without mercy, but he was also practical, and practical men knew when to cut losses. The next morning, the surveillance ended. Vincent's men withdrew from Chicago. No more black sedans. No more threats. The war was over, and Elena would never know how completely Dominic had shielded her from destruction. 2 months passed, and Crane Estate transformed. Not the walls or the furniture. Something deeper changed, something that couldn't be measured in renovations. The house learned to breathe again. Laughter returned. Real laughter. Lucas chased Mia through the kitchen while Elena pretended to scold them. Dominic came home to giggling instead of tension. The children blossomed. Lucas stopped flinching at sudden sounds. His nightmares faded. Mia began drawing again, bright colors, happy scenes. One evening, she presented her latest masterpiece at dinner. 4 stick figures standing in front of a house. "That's our family," she announced, pointing to each figure. "Daddy, Lucas, me." Her finger moved to the 4th figure, a woman with dark hair standing beside Dominic, and Elena. Elena's breath caught. She looked at Dominic uncertainly. He simply smiled. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. We should frame it." Lucas stopped calling her the housekeeper. Now she was Miss Elena, spoken with warmth. Dominic stopped treating her like an employee. He asked her opinions, included her in decisions, looked at her differently. Elena noticed. She tried not to think about what it meant. Late one evening, Elena carried tea to Dominic's study. He wasn't working. He was holding Isabella's ring, turning it in his fingers. "You're still awake?" she said softly. Dominic looked up. "I was thinking about the children, about how much has changed." He paused. "About you." Elena's cheeks flushed. She stepped toward the door. "I should let you rest. Wait." Dominic set the ring down and crossed the room until he stood before her. Close, closer than ever before. "I'm not good at this," he said quietly. "Words, feelings. I've spent my life building walls." Elena didn't breathe. "But you've changed this house, changed me. The way you care for Lucas and Mia, the way you stood strong when anyone else would have crumbled." He took her hand gently. "I don't expect anything. I'm not asking you to feel the same. I just wanted you to know." His thumb brushed her knuckles. "I see you, Elena. Not as a housekeeper, as you." Tears pricked her eyes, not sadness, but hope. She didn't pull away. And in the quiet study, 2 broken people took their first step toward something new. 1 year later, Crane Estate stood, bathed in golden afternoon light. The gardens bloomed with roses and lavender flowers that Isabella had planted years ago, now tended with love by hands that had learned to call this place home. Elena Martinez was no longer the housekeeper. She was family, officially, completely, irrevocably. The proposal had come on a quiet evening in spring. No grand gestures, no crowds, no fireworks, just Dominic and Elena sitting on the garden bench where Isabella used to read bedtime stories to the children. He had pulled out a velvet box, but not the one Elena expected. Inside was a new ring, a diamond set in white gold, simple and elegant, chosen specifically for her, not inherited, not borrowed, hers alone. "I thought about using Isabella's ring," Dominic had said softly. "But that ring belongs to her memory, to what we had." He took Elena's hand. "This ring is for us, for what we're building together. Something new," Elena had cried. Happy tears, healing tears. The tears of a woman who had spent her whole life believing she would never belong anywhere, finally finding her place. Isabella's ring now rested in a glass display case in the living room. The children passed it every day. They could see it, touch the glass, remember. Dominic gathered Lucas and Mia in front of it one morning, Elena standing beside him. "This ring belonged to your mother," he said gently. "She wore it every day of our marriage. It holds all the love she had for you, for me, for this family." He placed his hand on Elena's shoulder. "And this ring belongs to Elena. 2 different women, 2 different rings, but both of them love you more than words can say." Mia launched herself at Elena, wrapping small arms around her waist. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered. "I'm so glad you stayed." Lucas stood straighter, trying to look mature, but his eyes glistened as he nodded. "Me too," he said quietly. "Me too." Elena held them both, tears streaming down her cheeks. These children who had once cowered in fear. These children who had learned to cry without sound. Now they laughed freely, loved openly, trusted completely. She had helped give them that, and they had given her everything in return. Sometimes the most dangerous people don't break down your door. They walk in with smiles, with promises, with exactly what you want to hear. They wear masks so perfect that you invite them into your home, your heart, your family, never suspecting the darkness beneath. But the truth always reveals itself. Watch how people treat those who can give them nothing. The servants, the children, the invisible ones. That's where you'll find their real character. That's where the mask slips. And when you find someone who shows kindness without expectation, who protects without recognition, who loves without condition, hold on to them. They are rarer than diamonds, more precious than gold. They are the ones who make houses into homes. Elena stood by the window, watching Lucas and Mia play in the garden. They were chasing butterflies, their laughter floating up through the open glass like music. The sun painted everything gold, and for a moment, the world seemed absolutely perfect. She felt Dominic's presence before she heard him. The warmth of his body behind her, the gentle weight of his hand on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Elena smiled, leaning back against him. "I'm thinking that I spent 22 years searching for somewhere to belong. 22 years feeling invisible, unwanted, alone." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "And then I found this house, these children, you." Dominic pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You didn't find us," he murmured. "You saved us." Outside, Mia spotted them at the window and waved excitedly. Lucas pretended not to care, but he was smiling too. Elena waved back, her heart so full it ached. For the first time in her life, she had a place to call home. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our daily uploads. Give this video a like if Elena's strength inspired you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that kindness matters. We want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever trusted the wrong person? Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories mean the world to us. From the bottom of our hearts, we wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May you always find people who see the real you and love you for it. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves and each other.